So, um, I know a lot of what you were doing back then was inspired by the Middle East or uh, the East. But what is your take on Buddha? What do you know about Buddha? And let's have a little Buddha discussion. We haven't talked about Buddha, I don't think.
This question for Jesus or
Anyone,
anyone.
Michael, Jesus, whoever can answer.
Michael will take it. Michael says, let's let Jesus off the hook because, he and Buddha are not the best of friends. They hiss at each other when they're in heaven. Just kidding. But you would think it was that way from the way the Christians behave. So, Buddha is the inspiration for the nation of people who came to see that life could be very different for them because they lived in a very stagnant society. Their society was very stagnant at that time. And so they could not rhyme heaven and earth in a healthy way. They thought they always had to be taken through this trajectory that was very, very debilitating, you see, because they thought that they would have to live lives of poverty because that was their trust on being told that was their part to play. You just had to play the part that was handed out to you. But who handed it out to you? You see? And so if you were born into a poor family, that was your part to play. If you were born into a family that was rich, you see, that was your part to play. And God was rewarding the ones that were rich, and He was punishing the ones that were poor. And that's why they were born poor or rich, you see. And of course, it broke down into a much more complicated sense of social restrictions and social privileges. And so this was very confusing to the people who thought about it. How come I can't change my stars, you might say? How come I have to be poor just because I was born into a poor family? Did God really punish me in this way? And it confused the rich and the poor as to why it had to be this way. And so he came to a realization that it didn't really matter anyway. You could be rich or poor. You could be rich and grow up to be poor, or be poor and grow up to be rich. Didn't matter because God didn't care. God didn't punish you, and God doesn't reward you. He just says, have fun, my dear, and enjoy your stay in physical reality. And so he began to enjoy his stay in physical reality. And it took him a while to figure this out because he was born into a society that didn't think that way. And so, just like Jesus, he introduced an idea that was new to the people and it inspired them to get a different point of view. So, Jesus inspired people to get a different point of view because he introduced, or reintroduced, I should say, the idea of God the Father, that God is not a cruel judge that punishes you or rewards you according to whether you sacrifice this animal on this and that date or whatever, and or eat tainted meat. God doesn't do that. You do that. And so the idea of Buddhism arose out of the idea that there didn't have to be this cruel judge up in the sky who would decry the things you would do. He didn't really care. And that set you free to live your life in a simple reality where you could look around you and say, well, this is real today. This is my reality. That's all there is to it. It's my reality. And so the whole idea of meditation that became a part of the Buddhist tradition is not that you leave the physical world, but that you leave your programming about it. You leave the idea that it has to be a certain way. We've talked before about your experience and your interpretation of experience. And the interpretation of experience in his time was that it just had to be that way. Whatever your experience in life had to follow a certain trajectory because you were born into a certain station in life, etc. And this arose because it did provide a certain stability in the community of people who were constantly squabbling with each other. And so the idea of turning certain rules into stone, you might say, and requiring everybody to comply with them often starts out with the best of intentions, that it keeps people from squabbling. But when it becomes a rule that defines who you are, what you are, where you are, and why you are, then it is a stumbling block to your happiness. So the ultimate key for me and those with whom I work is, are you happy or not? Are you happy? If you're happy being poor, what's the problem? If you're happy living in a palace, what's the problem? If you're happy climbing a tree, what's the problem? If you're happy working in the grocery store as a teller and greeting the customers and saying, how are you today? And what's the problem? If you're happy, what's the problem? If you're not happy, what does that tell you? And so it was the idea that there was so much unhappiness in the society that motivated him to see that there had to be something that wasn't right. And he set out on a journey to figure it out. What was not right? Why were people so miserable all the time? Why were some people rich and some people poor, and that's the way it had to be? Why would there be a God that would decree who you were and why you were and where you were and all that other stuff? And there was no reprieve. And this became his way to see that really all of reality was just a trust on reality. So it's kind of the opposite of the idea that you should be afraid of not being afraid. It's kind of the idea that you should love being loved and loving others and the world around you. If you can love, then you will smile at your neighbor and say, I love you today because I love loving you. I love the fact when you say I love you to me. When I look at the tree, I see how beautiful the tree is, and I say I love loving the tree. And that's how simple it can be. Does this make sense to you?
Yes.
Does that answer your question, Vic, or is there more to it?
I think that's it. It seems like some of the original teachings, again, as we see time and time again, have been kind of twisted over time. But yeah, I mean, the central point is still there.
generate any other questions for anyone or thoughts?
I'm glad Buddha
They're
and
not
Jesus are
generated by
friends.
that, but you've been carrying around in your pocket.
I liked what Vic just said. I love that Jesus and Buddha are friends.
Uh, I'm out of questions for now. I'm gonna have to do some more thinking.
I would only I'm the new kid in the group, and I I've just been listening and understanding that heaven is so different from what we were taught, that all the things that have been talked before in this group. But um, I don't know if any of them want to share just a little bit of dynamics about what it's like and how you manipulate things and create things. I read a book from someone, a Christian lady that had gone to heaven and come back, and she talked about the creativity. I think Jesus was just talking about of if she loved roses, so she cast roses out onto this marble courtyard, and they just went into it and grew and bloomed. And I don't know, perhaps the reality of heaven a little bit more, the reality of what that is could help people if there's something that Jesus or Michael or Alan or whoever would like to share.
Let's see. I have to tell you, I don't know what I'm interested in what your view of it was because I was raised as a Catholic and I had no clue. It was like the only thing I knew was you had to sit on a cloud with these holier than thou people who would gossip, behind your back and play a harp for eternity. And it just didn't sound like fun for me.
Wow.
I don't know what your version of it was.
Yeah, it was something where I don't know, you wanted to do what God and Jesus taught in the word of God. And of course that's all based on all the preachers' interpretation of it. And so we're learning about all that. But I think I've been intrigued with seeing that it's very practical, hearing about Steve and you working out things, and like Jesus was just saying, you bring ideas, or whoever, you bring ideas and then you work through them on earth, and then like Steve's coming back to put things into motion. And I don't know, that's just such a different view of a typical Christian, where you just do the best you can, you hang on, and then you'll go to heaven, you'll worship God, you love God, you'll sing his praises for all of eternity. And
And it's a beautiful garden.
yeah, and I had no concept of, I would hear about people, different stories in the Bible, and like Jesus saying, if you can believe this is Elijah coming back when he was on the Mount of Transfiguration or something. And I never believed that there was this interplay until someone told me that my father, who died very young, had decided to come back. And that was part of the awakening for me as a young person. I know you lost your father too. And anyway,
Well,
I
just
just,
so you know, my father is Tobias.
I know that I just love him.
That connection afterwards for you.
Yeah.
Well, let's ask them because they may have different experiences.
That's interesting.
So, do you guys care to share about all that? Tobias will. So, my experience was quite different than what you described there. My experience in heaven was that, at least recently, can't speak for all of time because it would be way, way too complex, is that I'd get to heaven and I'd say, dang it, I blew it again. I blew it again because every time I go back there, I want to begin all over again and explain to people that they got it all wrong. And I got back there and I got educated out of my ideas that I had in heaven. And I screwed up, and sometimes I screwed up pretty bad. And I did things sometimes that you would consider pretty bad. But I did my best. I did my best to try to test the limits you see and see what I could get away with. And sometimes I did okay, and other times I did pretty poorly. And I came to see that it would never get any better for me. That's the way I thought of it. And so I did the best I could because I had already passed through the layers of heaven. So people talk about the layers of heaven, and we haven't talked about that here much. That essentially, when you come to heaven, you're going to experience a world that is a trust on what you need at the moment. Because some people can't expand too much. Some energy, you might say, can't expand too much. We've talked about people that spin slow and those who spin fast. You see, when we talk about people, we're really talking about the soul energy, but we're talking about it in terms of individual personality. And that continues through lifetime after lifetime, you see, because you always are your history. That's what you are. You're your history. And so we think of that as individual people. And so I would come to heaven, and I didn't need to stay in some of the realms where other people go, where they carry on much as they did as on earth, or they get a little bit more elevated and they live in a little happier world or whatever. I ended up in the higher realms because I'd been through it for so long in so many different ways. And I already knew about that. And I didn't need to be in Disneyland, you might say, and just be happy and going wee as I go on all the rides. I didn't need to do that like a lot of people do. And so I would end up in this realm where people would say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Tobias? Although I wasn't always called Tobias. I have chosen to use the name Tobias here because, well, we'll get into that. But anyway, I would get there and they'd say, well, what are you going to do, Tobias? And I would say, I don't know, because I can't seem to make a difference on earth, can I? And they'd say, well, you can talk to people on earth if you can, try and guide them, because that's what we would do at that level. It was the guiding level, you might say, where we would try to help people on earth to change their ways. And I would come and say, hey, I'm here to be your guide. And they would say, well, go away because I don't even know who you are. Are you the devil? And I would say, no, I'm not the devil. I am Tobias, or whatever name I was using, and I'm here to be your guide and help you on earth. And they would say, well, okay, I guess I can let you guide me. So guide me. And I would say, well, we need to talk about it a bit. We need to talk about what you need and how you can achieve it, and et cetera, and how you can grow. And they would say, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't understand what you're saying there. And I would say, well, da 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 da. And I'd try my best. And occasionally I'd get a few words through. And it was kind of rough going. And I was getting very, very cynical. And it may sound strange that you can get cynical in heaven, but I was getting cynical because it just seemed like I might as well go back down to the lower levels, you see, where they didn't even know about all of this stuff. And when you're on the lower levels, you think you have it all. You just say, well, this is everything there is. This is cool. And that's okay. That's okay. If the children want to play on the playground equipment, that's okay, because that's what it is for them. And so if they want to be in a realm where they can sit on the beach all day with their dog and their best friend, that's okay. That's okay. But it wasn't where I was, but I thought, well, I might as well go back down there and sit on the beach with my dog all day. because what's the point of trying to change anything? It's always going to be this way. It's always going to be this way. And it's not like I didn't have the opportunities. Steph is reminding me of how I would tell her that I would go fishing in a crystal clear stream and stuff. And that's true, I would, just to get away and do it my way and be by myself, you see. But I was pretty tired of it all, and I didn't even care anymore. And so when Steph came to me, and this is hard for people to understand, it was actually me that came to her because I was sent to her, you see. And so you can ask who sent me. And it was Michael. Michael said, "Hey, Tobias, see that little girl down there? Although she wasn't a little girl, she was what you would call an older woman. I want you to go be her friend." And I said, "Well, I don't know, because I don't want to go through that again. I'm really thinking that I'm not cut out to be a guide, you see, for humans." And Michael said, "Well, give it a try, give it a try." So I went and I said, "Hi." And she said, "Hi, who are you?" And I said, "I'm Tobias." And she said, "Well, hello, Tobias. Nice to meet you." And I said, "Nice to meet you too. I'm here to be your guide." And she said, "Why do I need a guide?" And I said, "What? Everybody needs a guide because you're down on earth and you can't see anything. You don't know what's going on down there. You're in the dark, right? You need a guide." And she said, "Well, if you say so." But it seems to be okay for me. So what do you got to say to me? And I began to talk to her, and she said, "You're pretty stuffy. You're really kind of stuffy. You remind me of one of those school teachers that just thinks they're all it and everybody has to bow down to them and nobody can challenge them." I said, "Well, you're very impudent." And I went back to Michael and I said, "I don't think I can handle this. Give me another assignment, please." And he said, "Oh, I think you should hang in there a little longer and see what happens." And I said, "Well, she's incorrigible. I don't think I'm going to get anywhere with her." And Michael said to me, "Well, Tobias, maybe she's got some things to teach you." And I said, "Oh, boo-hoo. Yeah, right. Like somebody on earth who's in the dark has anything to teach me." But I went back to talk to her, and she was okay with talking to me. She didn't hate me or anything. She just said, "Hey, Tobias, tell me some things because I want to know how I know you because I think I know you." And she did. She remembered me because I was in my identity at that time from my lifetime as a man called Tobias in the 2nd century AD. And we had met in that lifetime because she was actually a slave girl that belonged to me. And so as we got to talking, she said, "Well, that's very curious. I want to know more about that lifetime because I remember I was the slave girl and I remember that I met Marcus Aurelius in that lifetime. So tell me more about it, please, if you know." And I said, "Well, I know, but I'm not going to tell you about it because it's kind of a miserable story if you ask me. And I don't want to be sad, you see, so I'm not going to tell you about it." Now, you have to understand that when we're in heaven, we can pick and choose how we choose to exhibit our energy. So when you go to heaven, you'll probably say, "Hey, I want to be in the same identity that I was in my last lifetime." So people will say, "Hey, it's Jim and Paula here today." And the people on earth will say, "Hey, Jim and Paula, nice to meet you. Nice to have you come and visit us." If you come and visit them in their dreams or whatever. And people want to do that if they even think about it, because there are still people on earth who know them in that identity, you see? But in my identity as a guide, I chose to be this particular man, and I'll tell you why. It's because I hadn't resolved all his issues, you see. And sometimes we're pulled to an identity where we have not resolved all the issues in our lifetimes. And so it will be as if we are that person, you see. We'll still have some memories of our greater identity, but we'll be focused into that lifetime for a reason, because there's issues that are still troubling us, you see. And normally in heaven, we don't get a chance to expunge those issues because we don't have the interaction that would cause us to have to grow. There has to be a little bit of challenge, a little bit of friction, you see. And in heaven, there's no friction. You're in a frictionless world. And so I was in that identity. It might be like saying that you could choose a particular age that you were on earth. Let's say you were 5 and something happened to you. And you were drawn to that age because you never resolved the issues. And so they're heavy on your heart. And so I was called to this particular stage of my own development. And there were things that were heavy on my heart. And so as we began to chat, Steph and I began to decry my connection with her in that lifetime, because that's where the issue was, you see. That's where the biggest issue was, around those things. Not just with her, but with her mother, you see, and her father, who were part of the story. And so Michael had arranged this, you might say, from his greater perspective, in order to help me grow. And in order to help Steph grow. Because it's all a synchronized dance, you might say. But you don't know how your part will go until you play it. You see, you have to play your part, whether you're in heaven or on earth. And so I was playing the part of the guide, who turned out not to be so great a guide, although I still pretend to be a guide and say, Steph, hey, I got to tell you this or that. And she says, okay, Tobias, but what about this? But anyway. So we finally became friends. Well, it wasn't finally, it happened rather rapidly. And I told her the story of how she met Marcus Aurelius and how I cut off her ear. And she said, okay, glad to know this today. And so gradually I let go of my sorrow because the issue was resolved, you see, because I felt so badly when I came to heaven after that lifetime about what I had done, that it was heavy on my heart, you see. And when you go back to earth, you don't have the opportunity to remember all this. So you don't get a chance to resolve it, you see. And when you're in heaven, you can't resolve it because there's no friction. There's no challenge. Everybody just says, hey, nice to see you today. I love you and hope you have a good day. And nobody brings up anything that's going to ruin anybody's day, because that's not the way we play. We don't want to see other people be unhappy, right? But sometimes when you're on earth, you don't really care and you say, hey, I remember the day you smacked me in the face because I didn't do what you told me to. And the other person says, well, you deserved it, you bitch, or whatever. Or they might say, hey, I'm kind of sorry I did that day. I was really in a bad mood, wasn't I? Let's talk about it, see if we can resolve it. So you have a choice on earth. You have a choice of either being defensive or offensive, or to redeem your energy on peace and harmony in your soul. Because each of these things affects your soul, you see. And you are the sole one that can change the trajectory. Nobody else can change it for you. Because the fact that you smack somebody in the face because they didn't do what you told them to can be a disgrace in heaven. And you don't want to think about it in heaven. You just say, well, there's nothing I can do about it now. So why would I be miserable when I'm in Disneyland? I'll just take the rides and play and eat all the cotton candy I want and stuff, and I'll never get sick, etc. And so you don't want to think about it. And so the fact that Michael connected me with Steph meant that I had to think about it. Because this is the difference, you see, about when you can connect heaven and earth. you can merge the two separate parts of reality. It's like saying that left hand can work with the right hand. They can clap together. They can work together. They're not separated, you see? So gradually I came to see that she didn't really care that I cut off her ear. And here I was fussing about it over nothing because she could hear just fine and everything was just fine for her. So she didn't hate me for it, but I hated myself for it, you see? And that's the worst part of it, is that you hate yourself and you don't want to admit you hate yourself. Well, when you're on earth, you want to say it was all that other person's fault. If they had done what I said, I would never have smacked them. You see, you're always the victim. Forced to do it. I was forced to shoot you because you slept with my wife. If you hadn't slept with my wife, I wouldn't have shot you, etc. You're always the victim. You know, the prisons are full of victims. And so in heaven, you are always the victimizing. And you always say, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Oh God, how did I come to do that? And so you don't want to think about it. But you've heard of people going through their past life reviews, and usually they're people that have not done really horrible things as you would think of them, but still their heart about breaks to think that they didn't do what their mother told them to when she told them to wash the dishes. Simple thing like that. And break their hearts, and they don't want to think about it anymore because there's nothing they can do about it anymore. Their mother's there, they can go and talk to her and say, I'm so sorry, you know, but I don't know. I might do it again the next time I'm on earth because I haven't learned my lesson yet. Because there's no friction here. And so I was expecting Steph to be upset by the fact that I cut off her ear because it still was a great sense of despair for me. And she didn't even care because to her, it was just some story about a past life that had interest. And it's not to say there's not emotion involved in it because she had a lot of emotion around some of these things. But she didn't care that I cut off her ear. That was the least of her concerns. The greatest of her concerns was what happened between her and Marcus Aurelius, you see, who, of course, was Stephen that life. And so she wanted to hear that story. And when she heard that story, she said, okay, I get it now. Makes sense to me why I kept having these memories. I couldn't piece it all together, you see. And so she was happy because she got that. And we continued to be friends. And gradually, I was able to let go of my identity as Tobias because I was no longer drawn to it or stuck in it because of the issue that had to be resolved. And so gradually, I came to understand my other identities. And so here's a little twist to this story. So somebody came to Steph and said, lots of twists in these stories, and said, hey, my husband died. He was Pakistani. And she said, my husband died young and left me with a child, and I'm unhappy, and etc. And I want to talk to him. And Steph said, okay, because she was doing lots of sessions for people in that day to help them connect with their friends or relatives who had gone to heaven. And so, of course, because she asked to talk to her husband came to talk, and her husband was me. And so I was called to that identity, even though I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't in that identity, but because of the energy of the wife in that lifetime, I was called. And Steph picked it up as she's talking to this woman, and she went, holy shit, this is Tobias. She didn't tell the woman that because the woman wasn't really into everything. She just wanted to talk to her husband, you see. Steph was like, afterwards, she's like, Tobias, that was you? And I said, yes, I had a lifetime in Pakistan. I died young and it wasn't a great life. And I'm sorry about some of the things I had done. And I had this lifetime where I died recently in Pakistan. I don't remember how long ago it was now, Steph, do you recall? I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. He died. Anyway, maybe not that long. Anyway, it wasn't long after that the other parts of the puzzle began to come apart. I had already figured out that I was her father, who died in 1959, you see, when I was still a fairly young man. and had that lifetime in Pakistan after that. But I didn't tell her, and it took a while for her to figure it out. And then, of course, eventually, a few other of my lifetimes were revealed. And so, if this gives you a picture of my experience, you might see that it can all be different, you see, depending upon your own soul energy. But the important part is that for her and Steve, because they connected after he died, and they went through time after time after time. I mean, I was sick of it because Michael said to me, he said, Tobias, you once agreed that you would be there to help Steph and Steve reunite. So you're going to have to do it. And actually, as in my lifetime as her father, I knew about Steve because when she was a little girl, she went to heaven and she came back and she told me, and she said, Steve talks to me and he says that I'm going to have to leave you one day and be with him. So I just want to tell you now, so if it happens, she was only a little girl. And I said, okay. And I didn't know what to think of it because I was a man on earth then. But I was open to the possibilities that something was going on that was very profound. Although her mother would not listen to it, I would let her babble to me about these things and I would try to figure it out because it sounded so intelligent to me. But again, I was a man on earth who had been raised in a family where you didn't really understand these things. And so you lose your vibration on heaven, you see? And the fact that Stephanie has retained it for so long has a lot to do with the master plan. Because before she came to Earth, you see, she said, I can't bear to go back there because she'd just been gassed in Auschwitz, you see, and she'd had some pretty miserable lives, let me tell you. And she said, I don't know if I can go back. She said, Michael, if I go back, will you come with me? And Michael said, yes, I'll be there, my dear. I will be there with you. So you might say the master plan has been in play for a long time. And Michael's had a lot to do with it. And so it didn't just happen that Michael showed up here. Michael is an integral part of the entire plan of the resurrection of the energy of humanity through their trust on being free of anxiety about their own part to play. Because everyone has a part to play in reality. And when they stop fighting it, you see, and they start saying, okay, I'm going to play it, and then it can change. So I think she's told you the story of how her mother came to see a different reality. And of course, her mother was my wife. And so I knew her well on Earth, you see. And Steph's stepfather was here too. And this story gets really complicated because I knew her stepfather before I married her mother. We met in Washington, where we were picking apples during the Depression years. And he was from North Dakota, and I was from Illinois. And we exchanged some communications afterwards, but nobody told her mother about it because her stepfather didn't want her to think that he only married her because he felt sorry for her, you see, because he had known me. And so after I died in a fishing mishap in Alaska, she ended up moving with her family back to North Dakota where he was living. And he was a widower then. And he met her. He knew her about her when she arrived because of some news articles. And he recognized the name, my name. And so it wasn't till after he died some years ago that Steph's little sister, who was his own natural child, was cleaning out the premises Well, actually, she was not cleaning out the premises. The people who bought the home from her mother, who had been gone into a rest home and then died, found some papers stuck in a very, very unusual place behind a stovepipe in the garage that was used for a shop. And they gave them to her younger sister. And in it was a picture of her family when they arrived in North Dakota after I died, and correspondence between her stepfather and me from the I can't remember the date exactly. It was either the late 30s or early 40s. And all of a sudden, there was this whole new mystery and level of connection, you see. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the connections go on and on and on. As each of you continues to interact with us, you will find that there are connections between all of us that stretch throughout time and space. And some of them are more connected than others. But what I'm trying to tell you is that heaven is a big place. And earth, or physical reality, is a vital part of the totality. And those people who come to heaven may have different experiences, you see, because of the different needs of their soul energy. Does this make sense to you? So our experience in the circle of love has been so powerful because it has allowed us to connect with you. And of course, Steph and Steve had a lot of issues to work out, a lot of issues. And I would pull out my hair and say, Steph, just tell him to go away if he's going to be like that. And she would say, okay. Then he'd come back again and again and again. And somehow they'd be together again and happy together. It usually take about 2 days. And then I'd pull up my hair and say, how did that happen? How did that happen? That you guys are now all lovey-dovey. And 2 days ago, it was like you'd never talk to each other again. And it was always because Steve had so many problems to work out. And Steph had a lot of resistance to him because of their history, you see. So they went back and forth in that way for 8 long years.
Wow.
Although it probably didn't seem that long to you, Steph, right? No, it wasn't that long to me. It didn't seem that long. Anyway, it was a roller coaster, right? Yes, it was a roller coaster. And so now Steve is coming back to Earth to redeem his energy on a new life where he will get fed, you see, because he didn't get fed in a spiritual sense in his last lifetime. So are you beginning to comprehend how complicated and yet how simple the connections between heaven and earth are?
Amazing.
Exciting.
If we were to get into your stories, you're going to find just as many amazing connections, you see. And in fact, the fact that you're here is one of the powerful connections into this story that will continue to pull up its roots so you can see how it all came about, you see? Because Michael has it in control. Michael and God work hand in hand, you see, because he's the messenger for the ultimate reality. And so he's sort of like the go-between. And that brings the light to light, you see? And the light to light is like saying that he brings his light to the light in you.
Yes.
And then there's a stream that flows from heaven to earth.
Beautiful.
So, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it just wonderful, beautiful. I've learned so much about heaven and how it's all part of it. And I think at some point, I think we've covered so many different things, but at some point, I want to understand the veil of forgetting. And but I think that would just maybe take too long. But I hope that could be in in play on the other side, because that's so important how we, if we don't remember. But so anyway, I am so thankful for
I
today.
can tell you this much, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but I
No.
can tell you this much, that when people get on the other side and they come back to check with their family or whatever, and they don't respond, they just give up.
Yeah.
They just give up and say, what's the use of trying to connect with my loved ones back on earth? You know, Steve tried to connect with a lot of his family and friends through me, and it was just a blank wall. It was a blank wall. And I hated doing it because I knew it would be a blank wall. So maybe it was my own predisposition. But I did do it to try to help him. And it was always just a blank wall. And so it just didn't work. And so only those who come to me and who in the past, I don't do so many anymore, although I still do them, people who came to me and said, hey, I want to connect with my child, my father, my whatever, then they're open.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's so much release. There's so much release for the ones in heaven because they're like, I just wanted you to know I was still alive.
Nice.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure everything's good between us. You forgive me for everything I ever did to you. And I want you to know that I love you and stuff. That's the message. It just releases so much of their tension. But people on earth don't think that way. So what happens is you go that way, you go through heaven. It's time to come back to earth. You remember. And then your parents, the people train it out of you.
Yeah.
Oh,
They train it out of you. They force you to
Right.
not remember. The veil of, there's nothing natural in the veil of forgetfulness. It is the confusion in the cycle. The people that have been trained on earth, when your child says to you, I remember when I was big and I was your mommy and you were just the baby. They, oh, what a great imagination you have, honey, but that's impossible. You see, you're just a baby. And by the time they're verbal, they essentially realize that's the only way to communicate and only in terms that are allowed. You're only allowed certain ways of communicating on earth because, you know, like my experience when I was 3, and my mother said, I will punish you. She actually would punish me if I continued to tell lies. And look at it today. You know, does any of my family, multiple siblings and etc., do they come to me and say, hey, I think this is really cool, you know, could you pass on messages from people in heaven to me? Oh, you know, do any of my friends, old friends from high school, come to me and say, hey, or you know, in my law practice, come to me and say, hey, that's so cool, could you pass on some? So that's the veil of forgetfulness. It's not something that is necessary. It is the cover that people put over it to hide from their fear of not being afraid. How can you not be afraid of talking to dead people? You got to be afraid of dead people, right?
Well,
You got to be afraid of God. You got to be afraid of angels.
right,
If
right.
Michael the Archangel comes to me and talks to me, I got to be very afraid because I know that it's probably the devil masquerading, right? I just read something about Ouija boards. You got to be afraid of Ouija boards because demons talk through them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
On and on and on. So that's the veil of forgetfulness.
Interesting.
It's the veil of fear.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to start this community up or have more communities like this. We just need more of that spreaded.
Right. And that's what this whole project is. Like Mike Tobias was saying, this and I was told that when Steve came to me, this is a big project, Steph, and it's been going on forever because it's all part of God's plan, right? That we would grow and come back into unity, that we played this game for so long. We wanted to play the game of what would it be like if everything wasn't love? What would it be like? So we have to be afraid of not being afraid. That's the game. And if you can figure it out, if you can get, it's like playing a video game. If you can figure out the rules and you can figure out they're tricking you, the ones that are tricking you are telling you are the ones that are telling you that you have to be afraid of not being afraid of the devil.
That's huge.
And so to figure it out, to sort it out, and that's what Buddha did, sorted it out. And what Jesus did, sorted it out and figured out that what was illusion and what was real.
That is so wild. I have such a sense that there's a history that's going to unfold, but I just feel such at peace that Paula and I are being, it's just the right timing to become connected, and I don't have to talk to anybody. And I'm, like I mentioned before, I want to go through all these things, anything that I hold on to of the past that I can remember. I want to resolve it. I just want to be at peace. And then, like you say, I love how you just live in the now, you live in the day, you enjoy the reality. And that's where we're at. And it's just such a blessing to be part of this and part of you. And
Well, you guys too. I mean, you guys are a blessing, and Paige and Vic and everybody in the group that is so open to sharing, to saying, let's all live today. Let's all just live and be happy together. Why do we have to defend ourselves against reality?
very fun,
Oh, yeah.
very fun. Yeah.
All right, let's close out for today. And thank you very much for being here, because I think that, and to anybody who's listening to this, if we're a self-selecting group, but not an exclusive group.
Yeah.
If that makes sense to you. In other words, self-selecting in that we just choose to function as a group where we can each wear our hair the way we want to. And if that appeals to you, you can, connect with me. And I know that we're willing to have anybody on as a guest to chat and hear where they're at if they want to exchange ideas. So, if you feel like you'd like to participate in a public video, and of course I do private sessions too, but there's a little charge for that. But in the group, it's just free. We just all contribute. And my part is just to be the communicator. Michael's part is obviously to be the total coordinator. God's part is to be God.
Yes.
And those Heavenside are just following their trajectory and their part. So it's all part of a bigger plan. But you have to decide if you want to be part of that plan, a group, or whether you prefer to continue to play the game of being afraid of not being afraid. And, just thinking that there's something that you're supposed to be scared of in reality and living in illusion. That's your choice, if that's the way you want to play. But if you want to play our way, or you want to investigate it and figure out how you can play our way, then connect with me, and I will leave my I'm on Facebook, Stephanie Patel, and I'll leave a email address in the description. So everybody have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
You too.
If you enjoyed this content today as much as I did, please hit the like button and subscribe, because those from Heavenside are sharing these amazing principles that are changing our lives.
I agree.
Thank you, guys.